Close your eyes just a moment. Let the silence around you settle into something deeper, a listening silence, a space where the past feels closer than the present, where old stories wait, not in stone or on paper, but in the quiet between breaths. Tonight, let's step into that quiet, into a mystery woven not from conspiracy, but from the delicate threads of human memory, a mystery preserved not hidden within the world's most private library. The Vatican's archives are not a fortress of secrets, but a cathedral of echoes. And in their stillness, if you listen closely, you can hear the faint, distant murmur of gods whose names were carved into clay millennia before Rome was built. Gods called the Anunnaki. This is not a story about what is hidden. It is a story about what has been remembered. Let us begin with a question that does not demand an answer, but invites a journey. A question that has quietly shaped the edges of history, whispering the gaps between faith and legend. What happens to the old gods when a new world arises? When one civilization falls and another builds its temples atop the ruins, where do the stories go? The tale we are about to trace begins not with a spaceship or a hidden revelation, but with a simple, profound human act, the act of preservation. For centuries, beneath the soaring domes within the silent, hallowed corridors of the Vatican, an immense, meticulous project of memory has been underway. It is a collection of humanity. Letters, decrees, maps, confessions, chronicles, from every corner of the known world. And within this vast ocean of parchment and ink, there are islands of a much older world. Fragments of stories from the dusty plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where the concept of divinity was first being etched into wet clay. Here, in the Vatican's care, lies scholarly notes, transcriptions, and translations of texts that speak of the Anunnaki, the celestial beings who, to the ancient Sumerians, decreed the fates of all things. The Vatican does not hold a secret file on these ancient deities. What it holds is something far more illuminating, a mirror reflecting how one culture's sacred myth becomes another culture's historical curiosity, and how, over centuries, to our understanding of the divine is a river, constantly fed by tributaries of older belief. So let go of the idea of a cover-up. Instead, prepare to explore continuity, a thread connecting the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the scholarly desks of Renaissance Rome. The mystery is not in a locked vault, but in the unbroken, often overlooked conversation between eras. The question is not what the Vatican knows, but what its archives help us remember about ourselves. What the Vatican Archives actually contain. Imagine a city within a city, a labyrinth of climate-controlled rooms stretching over 50 miles of shelving, resting deep within the sovereign soil of the Vatican City. This is the Archivum Apostolicum Vaticanum, the Vatican Apostolic Archive. It is not, as popular imagination might paint it, a shadowy cellar of forbidden lore. It is, in essence, the administrative memory of the Catholic Church, a living organism of history that has been growing for over a millennium. Its primary purpose is record-keeping. Papal correspondence, diplomatic treaties, financial records, canonical proceedings. But to define it solely by its bureaucracy is to miss its profound humanity. Over the centuries, as the Church's reach extended across continents, its archives became a gravitational pull for knowledge of all kinds. Missionaries sent back accounts of distant languages and customs. Scholars deposited their studies of ancient philosophies. Diplomats included descriptions of foreign lands and their strange, ancient histories. Think of it not as a locked chest, but as a sprawling, centuries-old library where the card catalog includes everything from a king's plea for absolution to a Jesuit's careful sketch of a cuneiform tablet he saw in Mesopotamia. The archives are structured not by mystery, but by meticulous, almost sacred devotion to order. There are indices, inventories, finding aids developed over generations. Access is restricted, yes, but not to conceal, to preserve. The fragility of these documents is immense. A single sheet of medieval vellum can be worn away by the oil of a fingertip, so the protocols are strict, the environment sterile, the handling reverent. When a historian is granted access, a process that involves formal petitions and scholarly credentials, they are not entering a treasure hunt. They are entering a sanctuary of context. They find ledgers in the Council of Trent, resting beside treatises on Egyptian hieroglyphs. They find letters about royal succession, folded alongside early translations of Babylonian creation myths. The archive's power lies in this juxtaposition. It shows us that the Church, throughout its long history, has been not just a theological institution, but a colossal curator of the human record. It collected knowledge of the Anunnaki, not because it believed in them, but because it believed in understanding the world in all its complex pagan, pre-Christian diversity. The archive is a monument to the simple, powerful idea that to know who you are, you must also remember who came before ancient Mesopotamia and the birth of the Anunnaki mythos. Now let us travel back, far beyond the marble halls of Rome, to the dawn of recorded thought, to the Fertile Crescent, the land of Sumer, around 5,000 years ago. Here, humanity took one of its most revolutionary steps. It began to write, and the first stories it chose to inscribe into the soft, permanent clay were not of kings or battles, but of the cosmos itself. In the humid, river-fed air under a vast and starry sky, the Sumerians conceived a divine hierarchy to explain the world around them. At the pinnacle of this pantheon were the Anunnaki. The word itself is shrouded in the mists of a dead language, but scholars generally interpret it as those of royal blood or princely offspring. They were not visitors from another world. They were the foundational elements of reality, personified, and was the Sky Father. Ki was the Earth Mother. Enlil was the Lord of Wind and Storm, the executive authority. Enki was the god of wisdom, water, and creation. These deities, and dozens of others, formed a cosmic aristocracy. They were not merely worshipped. They were integral to the functioning of the universe. They decreed the me, the divine laws and concepts that underpin civilization, everything from kingship to basket weaving. The Anunnaki were intimately tied to the state and the natural order. The king was seen as their chosen intermediary, his authority derived from their celestial mandate. Temples, the great ziggurats that stair-step toward heaven, were not just places of worship, but were considered the literal households of these gods. Their estates on earth. The relationship was transactional, rooted in the agricultural cycle. Humanity provided labor and worship, and the gods ensured the fertility of the land and the stability of the kingdom. This was a worldview of profound interdependence, where the divine was woven into the very fabric of daily life. From the flooding of the rivers to the authority of the city-state, the Anunnaki were powerful, capricious, and deeply present. They were the explanation for why things were the way they were. To understand them is to understand the mind of early civilization, a mind seeking order in chaos, authority in the heavens, and meaning in the turning of the seasons. This is the original earth-born context from which the mythos sprang, a human attempt to narrate the terrifying and beautiful mystery of existence. How Mesopotamian myths reached later civilizations. Civilizations, like people, inherit stories. They borrow, adapt, and reinterpret. The myths of the Anunnaki did not vanish with the fall of Sumer. Instead, they embarked on a long, slow journey across empires and epics, carried on the backs of conquerors and the scrolls of scholars. As the torch of power passed to the Akkadians, then the Babylonians, and later the Assyrians, the stories evolved. Names changed. Marduk, the patron god of Babylon, rose to supremacy in the creation epic Enuma Elish, battling the primordial goddess Tiamat. The Anunnaki were recast as his allies or subordinates, their roles reshuffled in the new imperial theology. These stories were not locked away. They were the intellectual and spiritual currency of the age, inscribed on countless clay tablets, stored in palace and temple libraries, like the famed library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh. Then came the empires of contact, the Persians. When Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon, a new cultural exchange began. Persian and Mesopotamian ideas began to blend. Later, the Greeks arrived with Alexander. Greek scholars, fascinated by the antiquity of the East, began to translate and record Babylonian knowledge. Berossus, a Babylonian priest in the 3rd century BC, wrote a history of Babylon in Greek, introducing figures like Oannes, a fish god who brought civilization to the Hellenistic world. A clear echo of the wise god Enki. This was a critical bridge. Through Greek, these Mesopotamian concepts entered the wider Mediterranean intellectual stream. Elements of these ancient myths, a great flood, a council of gods, the struggle between order and chaos, resonated with other cultures and found faint, distorted echoes in later traditions. The Romans, inheritors of Greek scholarship, continued the process. They were prodigious collectors and catalogers of foreign customs, often viewing them through a lens of political and antiquarian interest. So, by the time the Roman Empire Christianized, the raw material of Mesopotamian myth was not unknown. It was part of the dusty, sprawling backdrop of the pre-Christian past. A past the new faith sought to define itself against, yet could not entirely erase. The stories survived not as sacred truths, but as historical curios, fragments of a lost world, waiting in the wings of history for their next audience. Why the Vatican preserves Mesopotamian material? Why would the heart of Christendom, the seat of the Pope, care about the gods of a dead pagan civilization? The answer lies not in obsession with the Anunnaki, but in a broader, more profound intellectual endeavor. From the late medieval period into the Renaissance, a hunger for ancient knowledge swept through Europe. This was the era of rediscovery. Scholars, many of them within the church itself, began to look beyond the Bible and the church fathers for wisdom. They studied Plato and Aristotle. They unearthed Roman texts, and their curiosity stretched to the very dawn of civilization. When reports trickled back from travelers and missionaries about strange, wedge-shaped writings on clay tablets in the deserts of the East, it sparked a scholarly challenge. These were puzzles, the oldest written puzzles of humankind. The church, as the period's primary patron of learning, naturally became involved. Its motivation was multifaceted. First, there was a linguistic and historical drive. To fully understand the biblical world, one had to understand its neighbors. The Bible mentions Babylon, Assyria, and the rivers of Mesopotamia. Studying the original languages and histories of these places could provide context, confirm timelines, or offer clarifying parallels. Second, there was the project of comparative religion, to defend Christian theology. Some scholars believe it was necessary to understand all forms of belief, to trace the perceived errors of paganism, and highlight the singular truth of revelation. Third, and perhaps most simply, there was humanistic curiosity. Cardinals and popes were often men of immense learning, building personal libraries that were wonders of the world. They collected not just theological works, but manuscripts on astronomy, alchemy, geography, and mythology, a translation of a Babylonian flood story. Even if considered a pagan distortion of the true Genesis account, was a fascinating artifact of human imagination. It was a piece of the grand mosaic of human history. Therefore, when such documents or copies of them or scholarly letters about them made their way to Rome, they were filed away. They entered the archival stream, not as classified secrets, but as reference material, part of the Church's ongoing project to comprehend the entirety of God's creation, including humanity's earliest, stumbling attempts to describe it. The preservation was an act of intellectual stewardship, a silent acknowledgement that even the stories of forgotten gods are chapters in the long story of the human spirit. The misinterpretation of the Anunnaki in modern times. Every age remythologizes the past, according to its own fears and wonders. The 20th century, the age of rockets and radar, began to see ancient myths through a new lens, the lens of technology. In the 1960s and 70s, authors like Eric von Daniken proposed a radical rereading of humanity's ancient wonders and sacred texts. Could the gods have been, in fact, astronauts? Could their chariots have been spacecraft? Their miraculous powers advanced technology? Within this framework, the Anunnaki were perfectly cast. Their name was interpreted by some not as those of royal blood, but as those who from heaven to earth came. They were recast as extraterrestrial beings from a planet called Nibiru, who genetically engineered humanity as a slave race to mine gold. This was a compelling science fiction-infused narrative for a spacefaring generation. It offered a clean technological answer to the messy spiritual questions of origin. It transformed the Anunnaki from metaphor for natural forces into literal flesh and blood or metal and circuit engineers. Mainstream scholarship, of course, rejected this interpretation entirely. Assyriologists and historians of religion pointed to the complete lack of evidence in the cuneiform sources for such a reading. The texts speak of gods creating humans from clay and the blood of a slain god to serve as laborers. Yes, a powerful theological concept about the human condition, but there is no mention of genetics, planets, or interstellar travel. These are modern concepts superimposed onto ancient poetry. The Vatican Archives enter this debate not as a decider, but as a provider of context. The early translations and scholarly correspondence housed there show a very different conversation happening among experts. They reveal a slow, painstaking process of decipherment, focused on grammar, metaphor, and historical linguistics. The notes of a 19th century pre-scholar studying a cuneiform copy are not filled with speculation about aliens. They are filled with debates about verb tenses and the proper translation of the word for divine wind. The archives silently testify to the mundane, rigorous, profoundly human work of understanding the past on its own terms. They underscore that the ancient Mesopotamians were not leaving breadcrumbs for a future space age. They were articulating a worldview where the sacred was inseparable from the soil, the sky, and the social order. The modern reinterpretation tells us more about our own contemporary anxieties and fascinations than it does about the intentions of the Sumerian scribes. Letters, notes, and early translations housed in the Vatican. Let us now move from broad concepts to the tangible, the very paper and ink that hold this history. Within the archive's countless fasciculi or file folders, one can find the quiet, personal artifacts of scholarly pursuit. Imagine a letter dated 1852, written in elegant, sloping Italian by a missionary stationed in Mosul, near the ruins of Nineveh. He describes his superior in Rome. The local fascination with strange, fired clay bricks covered in little arrowheads. He has secured a few fragments and sends detailed wax impressions of the markings, wondering if the propagandified, the church's missionary department, has any linguists who might discern their meaning. Elsewhere, there are the notebooks of a Jesuit academic from the 1890s, filled with meticulous hand-copied signs from a newly deciphered cuneiform syllabary. In the margins in faint pencil are his musings. Compare this term for divine decree to the Hebrew concept of davar. Is there a common semantic root? There are official reports from the Vatican Observatory. Yes, the Church has an observatory requesting funding for an expedition to Mesopotamia, not for theology, but for archaeoastronomy, to study how temple alignments might correlate with Babylonian star catalogs. One might find the correspondence between a cardinal and a British museum curator, politely arguing over the loan of a tablet fragment for comparative study. These materials are not sensational. They are methodical. They include dictionaries compiled by monks, lists of divine names cross-referenced across cultures, and transcript of academic symposia where priests debated secular historians. There are also the less glamorous records. Invoices for shipping crates of clay tablets. Requests for preservation materials like special acid-free paper. Minutes from library committee meetings, deciding how to catalog pagan mythological texts. Subsection Mesopotamian. This bureaucratic paper trail is perhaps the most revealing. It demonstrates that the Anunnaki as a subject were normalized. They were a filing category, a topic of academic inquiry, a puzzle to be solved with philology and historical criticism, not with speculation about ancient astronauts. These documents reveal a centuries-long, ongoing conversation conducted in ink and humility, a conversation aimed not at uncovering a shocking truth, but at patiently reconstructing a lost chapter of the human story, one fragile syllable at a time, what scholars actually found and what they didn't. So, after all this preservation and study, what has the scholarly excavation of these texts, including those referenced in the Vatican's collections, actually concluded about the Anunnaki? The findings are rich, complex, and deeply rooted in human culture. Scholars have pieced together a detailed picture of a hierarchical pantheon central to Mesopotamian cosmology. They've traced how the number of Anunnaki gods shifted in different periods, sometimes being 7 deities who decree fate, sometimes 50, sometimes hundreds. They've connected their narratives to real historical events. The rise and fall of city-states, the legitimization of dynasties, the explanation of natural disasters. They've shown how the myth of the flood, a story found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, shares archetypal similarities, but also distinct differences from the Noah story, illuminating how different cultures process the trauma of cataclysm. They have found no blueprints for advanced machinery. They have found no descriptions of metallic vehicles descending on pillars of fire. They have found no scientific formulas or maps of alien star systems. What they have found in abundance is poetry, theology, law. They have found a people using the most powerful tool they had, language, to grapple with the fundamental questions of existence. Why are we here? Who is in charge? Why do we suffer? Why does the river flood? The archives provide the primary source fuel for these academic conclusions. A researcher can trace, through a century of correspondence, how the translation of a single line from the Enuma Elish evolved from a guess to a consensus. They can see how a mistaken 18th century interpretation of a symbol as flying shield was corrected in the 1920s to mean divine aura or terrifying splendor. The archival record is a monument to the slow, self-correcting nature of real historical science. It shows knowledge being built brick by brick through collaboration, debate, and sometimes respectful disagreement. The smoking gun that some seek, a papal memo acknowledging the Anunnaki as extraterrestrials, does not exist, not because it is hidden, but because it was never written. Instead, the archives are filled with a different kind of evidence, the evidence of the human mind at work, striving across centuries to listen to the whispers of a long-dead civilization and to understand what those whispers meant in their own time, not in ours. Why ancient myths resurface in modern curiosity. There's a profound and enduring magnetism to stories like that of the Anunnaki, a magnetism that transcends the scholarly consensus. Why does this ancient pantheon of all the thousands of forgotten gods capture the modern imagination with such force? The answer lies in a deep-seated human longing. We live in an age of stunning scientific explanation, yet the ultimate questions remain hauntingly open. The standard models of cosmology and evolution provide a how, But for many, they leave the why feeling hollow. Ancient myths, particularly those repackaged with sci-fi sheen, offer a different kind of answer, one that is narrative, dramatic, and personal. They restore a sense of cosmic drama to human origins. The idea that we were visited, engineered, or guided by advanced beings provides a comforting sense of purpose and design in a potentially indifferent universe. It makes humanity special again, not as the apex of a random evolutionary tree, but as the intended project of a superior intelligence. Furthermore, these theories often tap into a legitimate and healthy distrust of institutions. If established academia and traditional religion have, in some people's view, failed to provide satisfying answers, then perhaps the truth has been suppressed or hidden in vaults like the Vatican's. The archive becomes a symbol of that suppression, regardless of its actual contents. The myth of the Anunnaki as aliens is, in many ways, a modern myth itself, a myth for the technological age. It replaces the mystical with the technological, the miracle with the machine. It speaks to our awe of our own creations. If we can send probes to other planets, why couldn't others have done it long ago? This curiosity is not a flaw. It is a testament to our insatiable need for connection, for a story that places us in a larger, more exciting cosmos. The Vatican Archives, in their quiet way, address this curiosity, not by feeding the speculative flame, but by offering the raw materials for a deeper, more grounded wonder. The wonder of realizing that thousands of years ago, people just like us looked at the same stars and asked the same questions, and answered them with stories of gods who walked the earth. Stories that in their own way were just as ambitious and awe-inspiring as any tale of interstellar travel. The Vatican's public position on ancient mythology, what then is the official stance of the institution that safeguards these documents? The Vatican's position on ancient mythologies like that of the Anunnaki is characterized not by secrecy, but by a clear distinction between academic study and theological belief. Publicly, through its pontifical universities and councils, like the Pontifical Council for Culture, the Church encourages the scholarly study of all ancient cultures. It recognizes that these myths are invaluable cultural and historical treasures, windows into the human soul's search for transcendence. Pope John Paul II, in his 1998 encyclical Fides Et Ratio, Faith and Reason, emphasize that the Church values scientific research, seeing it as a way to understand better the world God created. This includes historical and archaeological research into pre-Christian civilizations. However, this intellectual openness exists alongside a firm theological boundary. The Church views these ancient narratives as a profound human attempt to understand the divine, attempts that find a fulfillment and correction in the revelation of Jesus Christ. In Catholic theology, elements of truth and moral understanding can be found in pagan cultures, a concept known as preparatio evangelica, preparation for the gospel. But the full truth is held to reside within the Christian tradition. Therefore, while a Jesuit scholar might publish a respected paper on the literary structures of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Church would formally reject any claim that the Anunnaki were real, physical beings who intervened in human history, as such a claim would contradict the doctrinal understanding of creation, God's nature, and humanity's unique relationship with the Creator. The Vatican's approach is thus one of nuanced separation. The archives are a place for history. The Catechism is a place for dogma. One can explore the former with the tools of reason, while the latter is held by faith. This is why you'll find no official Vatican pronouncements on the Anunnaki as aliens. The idea simply falls outside the realm of serious theological or historical consideration from their perspective. Their public position is one of serene disinterest in conspiracy theories, coupled with sustained, quiet support for the genuine academic work that situates these myths in their proper human context. What these archives really teach us about human history. Peeling back the layers of speculation, What enduring lesson whispers from these miles of shelving? The true revelation of the Vatican Archive in relation to the Anunnaki and countless other subjects is a lesson about the continuity and creativity of the human spirit. These preserved documents show us that history is not a series of isolated silos, but a constant, flowing river of influence, reinterpretation, and memory. They demonstrate that our ancestors were not primitive or simple. They were profound poets of existence, architects of meaning, who built intricate systems of belief to navigate a mysterious world. The archives teach us humility. Seeing the meticulous notes of a 17th century monk, struggling to comprehend a Babylonian god list, forces us to recognize our own place in a long chain of inquiry. We are not the first to ask these questions, and we will not be the last. They also teach us about the universality of certain human concerns, the desire for order, the fear of chaos, the need for authority to be legitimized by something greater than itself. The Sumerian king list and the papal bulls in their own ways are addressing the same fundamental political theological problem. Most importantly, the archives reframe the quest. The treasure they offer is not a single earth-shattering secret about our origins. The treasure is the panoramic view of the quest itself. The breathtaking, millennia-long human project of trying to answer the unanswerable. By preserving the Anunnaki myths as historical documents, the archives, perhaps unintentionally, perform a sacred service. They honor the sincerity of that ancient search. They say, in effect, your stories mattered. Your questions mattered. We may have different answers now, but we will not let your voice be completely lost. In this, the archives become more than a repository. They become a metaphor for collective human memory. Fragile, selective, bureaucratic, but ultimately devoted to the notion that to forget where we came from is to lose a part of our soul. Conclusion, the echo of the old gods. And now, we return to where we began, to silence and to listening. The journey through the archives brings us not to a dramatic climax of revealed truth, but to a quieter, more resonant place of reflection. The Anunnaki are not waiting in a vault to be exposed. They never were. They reside where they always have. In the clay and the poetry and the scholarly footnotes and the endless human fascination with the stars. They are echoes. Echoes of a time when the world was new to writing, and every storm and harvest was a message from the gods. The Vatican Archives do not silence these echoes. They capture and preserve their faint reverberations, allowing us to hear them across a gulf of 50 centuries. This is a real secret, one that is hiding in plain sight. There is no war over God in these documents. There is only a long, continuous conversation. A conversation between the past and the present, between faith and reason, between myth and history. The archives show us that the divine story humanity tells itself is ever evolving, but the yearning behind it, the yearning for meaning, for origin, for connection, is eternal. So, as you open your eyes and return to the present, carry this thought with you. The next time you look up at the night sky, remember that you are part of that unbroken conversation. You are the latest listener, the latest interpreter. The old gods of Sumer may be silent, but the questions they embodied, who are we? Where did we come from? Those questions still hang in the air, as fresh and urgent as they were when the first scribe pressed a stylus into clay. The archives remind us that we are not alone in asking. We are simply adding our own voices to a chorus that is as old as civilization itself. And in that chorus, in that shared, timeless quest, lies a unity far more profound than any hidden secret could ever provide. A quiet breath passes, silence stretches for a while, and then only the echo remains.